Hi, everyone. I am so excited to get kicking butt on module 2. So let me start my timer so that we don't yammer on forever. Hello. Module 2 is really awesome, I think. And it's going to allow you, for those of you who are a little bit research oriented, maybe we wound up in the medical profession, to enjoy a little bit of research and get to see something pretty amazing. This module, the general idea is for you to engage with trans people talking personally about their transition experiences and their experiences with medical professionals, which are inevitably, any transition experience is inevitably talking with medical professionals for transgender people and other people who transition who might not identify as trans. And one of the ways that they do that is using this now ancient technology you might have heard of called YouTube. So you'll get to look at some YouTube videos. I'm going to limit the amount of time you look with them. I'm going to teach you the kind of keywords and terms and niche kind of acronyms that allow us to find one another on the World Wide Web. And you're going to get to write more formalized poetry. When I say more formalized, I mean you can absolutely still use words in the found poem fashion. I'm so excited that you did that. I'm so excited that you reflected on it. I welcome you here to the space. And there's going to be space here to do something that's a little bit more structured. So some of you are saying, woohoo, and some of you absolutely want to claw your face off. The great thing about writing more formalized poets, writing more formalized poems, you don't need to rhyme. I'm not that kind of sadist. Like you don't need to. We're not going to do meter. We're not in that way. Some of you love that. That's awesome. And I will show you ways to do that if you want to do that. I will put you in the right direction. But I set this up so there are so many poets, and you will find one that is enough in your voice, if not yes, and get to imitate them and get to write like them. And there's absolutely a poet who has already taught us how to do that. So we're gonna copy the work of the great Kenneth Koch. And at the end of this, I hope there's some time for you to sit and think a little bit about your own gender identity. Because gender is really, really relational. I'm sure that you've been in moments where you've acted more masculine or more feminine. A great example is getting pulled over by the police, right? Just how were you taught to act is deeply racialized, heritage-based, class-based. One of my favorite assignments, questions in class. Every year I would ask my students, what happens? They were 18, very earnest, and they were absolutely shocked to hear white women be told to cry. What? Young white men and every person of color absolutely shocked. And then to hear that it worked to get out of there, right? To enact certain versions of gender, right? That's not femininity, but how we relate to one another. The police is a great example, right? To hear from young Black students, never take your hands off the wheel, always make eye contact, always say, sir. Absolutely shocked. Other people and other identities. And so today, we want to think a little bit, just a little bit, about how you relate every time you're in a room with someone, every time you're seeing a patient or friend or colleague or a lover or a child or an elder person. We are learning and reproducing gender from one another. And so if you can think a little bit about yours, that's going to help you so much more not repeat things that you don't like and also make connections you might not have otherwise, right? And it helps you get to be you in whatever way. It just helps you be conscious about that in the world. I'm looking over at my notes. I'm very excited about today. We're going to be using, so to give you a heads up, the way the modules are going to go is in this first module, introduction to the assignment, you're going to be writing a poem and then reflecting on it. If you want to write more than one poem, yes. If you can write one poem, yes, I'm proud of you. I honestly am. I think you figured that out by now. Um, uh, uh, I am going to introduce you to watching these videos. You're supposed to watch, I think 20 minutes is a lot of these videos. I will walk you through how and where to find them again. That's going to be module 2, part 2. We're up to that next. Part 3, I will give you an example of a poet that I know that poet's work very, very well. I've known them and loved them for, oh my gosh, guys, 32 years. Oh, when you're like, how did that, what happened? I'm so glad I spent so much time with Frank O'Hara. And then I'm going to grapple with writing a poem. It's like you are, and set you up with these questions and sit with it just a little bit. So who is teaching us poetry today? I want to give you a heads up. We're not going to get to talk about this poet as much. We're going to use his book, but we're going to be using this book, Kenneth Koch. You can get this used, Sleeping on the Wing by Kenneth Koch and Kate Farrell, who is a student and colleague of his, also a poet, an anthology of modern poetry with essays on reading and writing. Essays, they're like this big. It's one of those things where you're like, whoa, I accomplished so much today. Like I read an essay, it was like 5 pages. That was a funny riff on some kind of masculinity I just did there. Don't know where it came from. But when you're looking at this book, it's so good. And I'm going to quote some of Kenneth Koch so I don't just talking about myself. But he has a bunch of poets in here, and you're going to pick one that you want to. I'm gonna work with Frank O'Hara. And one thing is that Kenneth Koch teaches us is that poetry is different in different times. And what people experience is different, and so to some extent, the language they use. So sometimes poetry seems really formal or really structured or really weird. Shakespeare might not be your jam. But modern poets, he writes, have tried a variety of forms, new ways of putting words together, of punctuating, of beginning and ending, of dividing up poems. And they have been more interested in non-rational ways of thinking than most poets before them, interested in dreams, the unconscious, accidental inspiration. They have tended to avoid the usual forms, the usual ways of saying things, ideas, logical connections, anything that might be limiting. Sometimes their poems seem almost like a new language. And he goes on later to say, the more personal thing you want to say, and the more particular it is to your own way of thinking and feeling and seeing things, the less likely it is that you can express it with the ordinary way of talking. So that's why we're turning to modern poetry. So modern poetry kind of starts after World War II. You can imagine that people were deeply traumatized because they were. And many poets served and fought in the war. Really, the moment, one of the founding moment of poetry is the Ball Turk Gunner. Randall Jarrell's really, or is that Wilfred Owen? I'm so embarrassed. I'll look and tell you in the next module. But this very raw war poem. And after that, looking back on war, we're not going to do anything like that. We're not going to be in the structure. We're not going to be caught up. We're going to be free. You also have this moment of abstract expressionism, really taking off. And the poets and the artists everywhere are in conversation, and that's stirring up. So who is Kenneth Koch? Why do we care about Kenneth Koch? Why do we trust him? So first of all, he was a Columbia University poetry professor. Why use his book? He wrote books like Rose, Where Did You Get So Red? Teaching children to write poetry, which is absolutely brilliant. And just to show you the number of poets, as a heads up, we get people like Emily Dickinson. She went to the college I went to. Different time though. Walt Whitman, Rimbaud, Ezra Pound. We get William Carlos Williams, a doctor. We'll be talking about him, a medical doctor. We'll be talking about him, not like me, in the next module. W.H. Auden, Frank O'Hara. You say, Jack, are there these people called women? Yes, I did mention Emily Dickinson. There is a disturbing lack of them, but I will point you to other poets that are women or trans people that if you really feel like there's nobody in here for you and you want to dig into somebody else, you can. Okay, I'm going to re-record that. I really like